Linda turned 40 in complete silence. No cake, no candles, no birthday cards slipped under the door. Just the cold hum of the fridge and the creak of old wooden floors beneath her feet. She didn't tell anyone, not her co-workers, not her neighbors, not even her distant son stationed overseas. Because what was there to celebrate 40 wasn't a milestone, it felt like a weight. Another reminder that her husband was gone, that birthdays had become just empty squares on a calendar, that even her shadow felt like the only thing keeping her company. That evening, she walked home from work with a bag of groceries pressed tightly to her chest, as if holding something close could fill the ache inside. The sky was already bruised with dusk, and the street lamps flickered on like tired ghosts. In that moment, Linda didn't feel older, she just felt invisible. Linda's apartment didn't echo with laughter anymore. It was the kind of silence that didn't soothe, it suffocated. The faded yellow curtains didn't flutter the way they used to when her husband opened the window just to let in the morning breeze. Now they just hung there, limp and forgotten, like so many pieces of her life. The armchair by the window still sat at the same angle he had left it in. His books, still on the shelf, collecting more dust than memory. Linda stood in the kitchen staring at two mugs, one clean, one untouched. She couldn't bring herself to wash his last cup. It was silly, but it made him feel closer. Her eyes lingered on the fridge door, a faded family photo held up by a weak magnet, 3 smiles, one now gone, one too far away, and Linda still standing. That night, as she sipped plain tea in the dim kitchen light, the memories came flooding in, not like a wave, but like a slow leak she couldn't plug. Every corner of that small apartment whispered his name, and that's the thing about grief. It doesn't scream. It whispers until all you hear is what's missing. It was just half a block from home when Linda heard it. A sharp voice slicing through the quiet like a knife through butter. Mrs. Antonia Jenkins, the self-proclaimed queen of the apartment complex. Always watching, always judging. And tonight, her judgment had a target. 4 homeless men huddled near the dumpster trying to stay warm against the biting wind. "Disgusting," she shouted. "You're scaring the children. Go loiter somewhere else." Linda didn't want to look, but she did, because something in her said, what if one of them has a story that deserves to be seen? 4 of the men looked exactly how Antonia described: dirty, layered, and torn coats forgotten by the world. But the 5th man, he was different. He sat slightly apart, back straight, shoulders squared like someone who once wore purpose like a uniform. His clothes were worn, yes, but clean, and his face partially hidden under a wide-brimmed black hat held a quiet strength. He didn't argue, didn't beg, didn't even glance at Antonia. He just sat there calm, as if the noise wasn't even meant for him. Linda paused at the edge of the sidewalk. Her eyes lingered on him, just long enough for something inside her to stir. It wasn't pity, it was curiosity. Recognition even, like meeting someone you were supposed to know in another life. She climbed the steps to her apartment, but the image of the man in the hat followed her inside. Back in her apartment, Linda tried to distract herself. She lit the stove, boiled water for tea, wiped the counter that was already clean. But her mind wasn't in the kitchen. It was still out there behind the building, where that man with the black hat had sat so still, as if the world no longer applied to him. There was something haunting about him, not in a frightening way, but in the way a song haunts you long after it ends, like a lyric you can't stop humming, like a question you didn't ask but can't forget. It was his eyes. She hadn't even seen them fully. They were half covered by shadows shielded beneath the brim of his hat. But what little she did glimpse stayed. They weren't desperate eyes, not broken or angry or begging. They were quiet, still, like the surface of a frozen lake, but deep beneath something moved. Pain, yes, but also strength, and something else Linda couldn't name yet, something that looked a lot like dignity. That's what made it so unforgettable. She had passed dozens of homeless people before, gave them spare change, averted her gaze, felt guilty, but walked on. But Daniel, though she didn't yet know his name, didn't ask for anything, didn't chase her down or make excuses. He just sat there and let his silence speak for itself. And for the first time in a long time, Linda felt that someone else might understand what it meant to be seen, but unseen, to carry pain so quietly the world forgets you're hurting. That night before bed, she looked out her window, half expecting to see the man again. He wasn't there, but the way he looked at the ground, as if it carried memories only he could read, that stayed with her. She didn't know why, but she knew she'd see him again. The next morning, Linda woke before the sun. The city was still asleep, its streets painted in a wash of gray-blue light. She didn't need an alarm. Grief had its own internal clock. She moved through her apartment quietly like a ghost in her own life. No rush, no excitement, just escape. Saturday meant one thing: the cabin. Her parents' old place tucked away in the Pocono Hills. 2 rooms, a crooked porch, and enough silence to let the heart catch its breath. Linda didn't go there to vacation, she went to vanish. To disappear from the noise of the world and the emptiness of her birthday. She packed a canvas bag, bread, coffee, an old flannel, tools for patching the roof because something always needed fixing, and a book she had read 3 times, but still carried like armor. Before leaving, she paused at the photo on the fridge again. Her younger self smiled beside the man she once called home. She touched the edge of the frame as if to say, "I'm still here, but I don't know why." Then she grabbed her keys, locked the door, and stepped into the pale light of a world that hadn't changed even though she had. She didn't know that this trip would change everything. She only knew she had to go. The alley behind Linda's building always smelled of damp cement and faded regrets. She usually avoided it: too many shadows, too many eyes. But that morning, arms full of groceries and tools, she cut through it to save time. That's when she saw him again. Same hat, same stillness. Daniel. This time he looked up. Not all the way, just enough for their eyes to meet. His voice when it came was low and careful. "Not too early for work?" Linda paused, surprised. His tone wasn't pushy. It was measured, like someone who hadn't spoken much lately and didn't want to scare her off. "It's my day off," she replied, her voice a little guarded. "I'm heading to a cabin. Old place. Always something to fix before winter comes." He nodded once, slow, steady. "I can help," he said simply, "if you'll let me." Linda blinked. People didn't offer help like that. Not strangers, and definitely not homeless men on a cold Saturday morning. "I don't want money," Daniel added quickly. "I know how to carry hammer dig. Sometimes a place just needs another pair of hands." Linda hesitated. Her instincts, shaped by years of caution, wanted to say no. But something deeper stopped her. Maybe it was the way he stood tall despite the wear in his clothes. Maybe it was the way he asked, not like a man desperate, but like a man trying to remember what purpose felt like. She found herself saying, "You'd need clothes and a place to clean up. People will complain if you ride the county bus like that." He looked down, not ashamed, just practical. "Fair enough." Linda bit her lip. "I have some of my husband's things packed away. If you want, meet me at the cabin. There's an old shower out back. You can change and, well, see how it goes." He tipped his hat, a gesture so old-fashioned it startled her. "Daniel," he said, offering only his name. "Linda," she replied softly. The bus pulled up, then hissing at the curb. She stepped on. He didn't follow, but he would, and Linda knew it. The bus ride to the cabin was usually quiet trees passing by like old friends outside the window. But that morning, Linda's thoughts were louder than ever. What did I just do? What if I made a mistake? She wasn't naive. She knew the world wasn't always kind to women who trusted too easily. A woman traveling alone, a stranger who came from behind a dumpster. It had all the markings of a cautionary tale, the kind you read in headlines and regret in hindsight. And yet she didn't feel fear. Not the kind that sits in your chest like ice. Not the kind that screams run. Instead, she felt something stranger, something warmer. A quiet hum beneath her ribs that didn't say danger. It said maybe. Maybe this wasn't foolish. Maybe this was brave. Linda tried to shake the thought. She told herself it was just a moment of soft-heartedness. Just guilt dressed up as kindness. But deep down, she knew better. There was something about Daniel in the way he offered help without expectation, in the way he spoke, without begging, in the way his eyes held a sadness that mirrored her own. She wasn't helping him out of pity. She was helping him because for one fleeting moment she saw herself in him. Both of them lost in plain sight. Not broken, just forgotten. The bus rolled on, each mile a mix of nerves and resolve. And by the time the hills came into view, Linda had made her choice. "We'll see how it goes," she had told him. But a part of her already knew something was going to change. Linda stepped off the bus into a breath of pine-scented air. The hills were quiet, too quiet for a heart that beat so loud. She walked the winding path to the cabin, every step echoing with uncertainty, and then she saw him. Daniel. He was already there, standing a few yards from the porch shoulders, squared a small duffel bag at his feet, as if he had been waiting not just for her arrival, but for permission to become someone again. Linda froze. This was the moment she could still turn around, still pretend none of this happened, still choose safety, predictability, loneliness. But Daniel didn't speak, he didn't plead, he just looked at her, not with desperation, but with patience. And in that look, she saw something terrifying hope. Not loud, not arrogant, but quiet, raw, real. A man who had nothing left, offering her the most vulnerable thing he still possessed, his trust. Her instincts screamed for caution, but her heart remembered what it felt like to be unseen, unheard, unloved. So she took a breath and said the word that changed everything. "Come on in." That was it. No grand speech, no dramatic gesture, just a choice, a single yes spoken by a woman who had lost enough to know the cost of staying silent. Daniel nodded once, picked up his bag, and followed her inside. Two strangers stepping across the threshold of a house and into a story that neither of them saw coming. The cabin greeted them with its usual stubborn charm. The porch creaked, the door stuck, and the scent of old pine wood still lingered in the walls, like a memory that refused to fade. Linda placed the canvas bag on the porch and turned to Daniel. "I brought some of my husband's old clothes," she said, handing him a neatly folded pile of jeans, a flannel shirt, a thick jacket softened by time. He accepted them without hesitation. No pride, no shame, just gratitude. "The shower's out back," she added. "The water's not hot, but it works." Daniel nodded, tipped his hat slightly, and walked around the side of the cabin, disappearing into the woodshed area behind. Linda stepped inside and began sweeping the dusty floors, trying not to think about what he looked like beneath the grime. But her mind wandered anyway. She didn't know what she expected, maybe a man a little less tired, a little more whole. But what came back was neither of those things. It was something more. Nearly an hour passed before she heard the sound of footsteps. When she turned toward the door, she nearly dropped the broom. Daniel stood there, a stranger wearing the same name. The dirt was gone. His hair was combed back, his beard shaved clean. The flannel shirt fit across his shoulders like it had always belonged to him. But it wasn't just the change in clothes. It was the way he carried himself, his back straighter, his eyes steadier, his presence no longer shrinking to the corner of a world that had tried to erase him. "You clean up well," Linda said, and immediately regretted the awkwardness of her voice. But Daniel just smiled just enough to crease the corners of his eyes. "Feels good to feel human again," he replied softly, and for a moment the silence between them didn't ache. It breathed. The hours at the cabin didn't pass the way they usually did, quiet, slow, heavy with silence. No. This time they moved differently, like light filtering through the trees, like something waking up inside both of them. Daniel worked with a quiet rhythm, splitting firewood, stacking logs, raking the yard. Each task done with the care of someone who knew the value of doing things right, even when no one was watching. Linda joined him in the garden. Together they pulled weeds, trimmed the flower beds, and swept fallen leaves into piles shaped like tiny hills of gold. They didn't talk much at first, but the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was comforting, like a song you don't need to sing out loud to feel. Later, Linda cooked dinner, potatoes fried with onions, bread warmed in the oven, apples sliced and dusted with cinnamon. They ate on the porch steps, plates on their knees, the scent of pine in the air. Daniel didn't say much, but he chewed slowly like each bite mattered. Afterwards, she made tea, and that's when the stories began. They sat beneath the open sky, cups and hand stars blinking above them. Daniel tilted his head back, pointed to the sky. "See that one?" He spoke of Orion, of Sirius, of constellations Linda had forgotten since childhood. But it wasn't just the stars. It was the way he spoke, as if every name in the sky was an old friend, as if he was mapping out pieces of himself in the dark. Linda listened spellbound, not just to the facts, but to the way he made the universe feel smaller, kinder, familiar. And slowly she began to feel something else, something dangerous and beautiful all at once. Safe. For the first time in years, she felt safe. Linda had gotten used to being invisible. At work, no one asked about her weekend. At the grocery store, the cashier never made eye contact. Even at home, her reflection in the mirror felt like a stranger passing by. People saw her, sure, but no one truly looked. No one paused long enough to ask, "How are you really?" No one noticed the silence in her voice or the weight in her smile. Until now. Until Daniel. He didn't bombard her with compliments. He didn't try to impress or charm. He simply noticed. He noticed when she winced lifting something too heavy. He noticed how she tapped her mug 3 times before taking the first sip, a small habit even she had forgotten she had. And when she laughed genuinely for the first time in what felt like years, Daniel looked at her like it mattered, like it meant something. He didn't just hear her words, he listened between them. And Linda, who had spent so long fading into the background, began to feel something strange bloom inside her presence. She was being seen, not as a widow, not as a woman past 40, not as someone who used to be, but as Linda, right here, right now. And in that simple, quiet recognition, a light returned to her that she hadn't even realized had gone out. They didn't touch. They didn't hold hands. No promises were made. No confessions whispered under the stars. But something had shifted. That night, as the fire crackled low and the sky faded to velvet, Linda looked across the porch and found Daniel already looking at her. Not staring, not studying, just seeing. His eyes held no urgency, no pressure, only a quiet presence that said, "I'm here if you want me to be." Linda looked away at first, out of habit. Years of grief had taught her to avoid what made her feel too much. But this time she didn't run. She let herself look back, and what she saw wasn't a homeless man, wasn't a stranger. It was someone who had chosen to stay, someone who made silence feel safe, someone who reminded her she was still capable of being wanted. They didn't speak, but in that moment when their eyes met, when the wind brushed against her shoulder and his gaze didn't flinch, Linda felt it. She didn't need a declaration, didn't need 3 words to know what was growing between them. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was recognition of wounds, of resilience, of the unspoken ache to matter to someone again. And in that quiet understanding, Linda's heart did something she hadn't expected. It moved forward, not fast, not loud, but undeniably for the first time in years forward. The cabin disappeared behind her as the bus rumbled down the hills. The further she traveled, the heavier her chest felt, not from regret, but from the quiet fear that real life was waiting to steal back everything the weekend had given her. By the time Linda stepped off the bus and turned onto East Walnut Street, she felt it. The eyes, the stares, the shift in the air. Curtains twitched. Doors creaked open just enough to peek. Whispers floated from balconies like leaves on wind. And there, as predictable as morning coffee, stood Mrs. Antonia Jenkins. Arms crossed. Lips pursed so tightly they could have snapped a steel wire. The queen of surveillance. The empress of judgment. "Well, well," she said loud enough for the whole block to hear. "If it isn't Linda Monroe. Out on a weekend getaway, were we?" Linda's grip tightened on the grocery bag in her hand. Antonia leaned in a little voice, sweet as spoiled honey. "Tell me, dear, where exactly did you take that filthy man you've been keeping company with? Behind a dumpster one day and into the woods the next. My, how romantic." Laughter, quiet but sharp, spilled from a nearby window. Linda didn't move, didn't flinch, but inside her something snapped back into place. Not fear, not shame, strength. She was done hiding. All eyes were on her now. Neighbors leaned against their door frames. Some held mugs of coffee. Some just held their breath. The courtyard turned into a stage and Linda stood center. Antonia was waiting, smirking, expecting the same old Linda. Quiet, polite, apologetic, but that Linda was gone. Linda took one step forward, her voice calm but steady like a held cord. "If you mean the man I was with," she said evenly, "his name is Daniel. And yes, I know exactly where I took him." The smirk faltered. "I took him somewhere warm, somewhere clean, somewhere he wasn't treated like trash." A ripple passed through the crowd. "I don't need your permission to care about someone," she continued, "and I don't need to explain myself to people who've forgotten how to be kind." Antonia's mouth opened, but no words came out. And then from the 3rd-floor balcony, a voice rang out. "Let her be, Antonia. Linda's always minded her business." Another voice joined. "Looked like a decent man when he was cleaned up." Someone else murmured, "At least he's not yelling at children in the parking lot." Laughter, soft, nervous, but growing. The crowd shifted. Antonia's grip on the moment slipped. Linda didn't gloat. She didn't have to. She had spoken her truth. And this time people listened. Linda stood still, heart pounding, waiting for the backlash. But instead came something else, a shift, subtle, like a breeze before a storm clears. Mrs. Tully from 2B walked down with her walker, stopped beside Linda, and placed a hand on her arm. "I always thought you were strong," she said softly. "Today, you proved it." Then came Omar, the single dad from the end unit. He nodded at Linda with a small smile. Man looked like he needed a second chance. We all do sometimes. And then a voice from across the lot, the teenager who always wore headphones. "Yo, Ms. Monroe, that guy helped you fix stuff. That's dope." One by one, they came forward with nods, quiet affirmations, or just respect. Even the old man with the barking chihuahua gave a thumbs up. It wasn't a parade. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. In a place where gossip spread like wildfire, kindness had just lit its first match. Linda turned the knob and stepped inside her apartment. Same hallway. Same lamp with the chipped shade, same quiet hum of the fridge. But she was different. She closed the door behind her slowly and leaned against it. For a second, she just breathed. Not the breath of someone hiding. Not the sigh of someone defeated, but the exhale of a woman who had just taken her place in the world. For years, Linda had made herself smaller, quiet, invisible. She had whispered her needs, tiptoed around conflict, let others write her story. But not today. Today, she wrote her own chapter, and in that single moment, between the silence of her living room and the echoes of the courtyard outside, Linda realized something crystal clear. She was no longer the woman who waited for permission, or apology, or rescue. She had become a woman who could stand her ground even if her voice trembled. And that kind of woman she didn't ask to be seen. She made the world look twice. The gravel crunched under Linda's tires as she pulled into the clearing. Same cabin. Same woods. But something felt different. The porch light was on. Her heart skipped. She stepped out of the car, groceries in hand, and slowly walked up the old steps. And that's when she saw it. The porch swept clean, the loose board on the third step nailed down, the window washed with a curtain tied back by a shoelace. She opened the door and gasped. A candlelit table, two mismatched chairs pulled close, a cheap bottle of red wine waiting in the center next to a plate of pasta and salad. Daniel stood near the stove apron made of an old dish towel. He turned sheepish, his eyes hopeful. "I figured," he cleared his throat, "if you were coming back, you deserved more than just dust and broken steps." Linda couldn't speak. Her chest swelled with something she hadn't felt in a very, very long time, wonder. The fire crackled in the small stove, casting shadows on the cabin walls. They had finished dinner. The plates were pushed aside. The wine bottle stood nearly empty. Daniel looked at Linda. A quiet smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Do you remember how to dance?" he asked, voice low. Linda blinked, then laughed. "Barely. It's been years." He stood, offered his hand, awkward but sincere. "I'm a little rusty myself," he said. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then placed her hand in his. No music. Just the rhythm of two tired hearts finding each other again. They moved slowly, clumsily. His foot tapped hers when she laughed. He mumbled an apology. She shook her head. And in that clumsy little waltz, surrounded by flickering firelight and silence, something beautiful happened. Two people who thought they had forgotten how to feel began to remember. Not the perfect steps, not the flawless timing, but the art of being present, of letting someone in. When they stopped dancing, they didn't let go. Daniel's hand rested lightly on the small of her back. Linda's head leaned against his shoulder. For a moment, there was only warmth, breath, presence, and then there it was, that tiny flicker, a pulse, a flutter, her heart, beating again, not because it had to, but because it wanted to. Linda stepped back slowly, her eyes wide, not with fear but wonder. For so long, her emotions had been quiet, muted, like a piano with no keys. But here in this rundown cabin with a man who had nothing to offer but truth, something inside her lit up. A single thought echoed through her mind, "I'm alive." Not just existing, not just enduring, alive. That night, Linda drove back home with a smile still lingering on her lips. She didn't even mind the rain. It was a soft drizzle, not enough to ruin the memory of Daniel's warm hands or the way his eyes had held hers like no one had in years. She showered, made tea, and sat by the window, heart full. For the first time in a decade, Linda felt light. Then the phone rang. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something pulled her to answer. "Ma'am, are you the wife of Daniel Carter?" Her breath caught. "Yes," she whispered. Yes, I mean I am his friend. He's at St. Mary's Hospital. He collapsed with a perforated ulcer. It's serious. He asked for you. The cup slipped from her hand, shattered, so did her calm. In seconds, Linda was out the door, coat half-buttoned, keys trembling in her grasp. Not again, not this time. She had just started to believe in something real, and now fate was trying to rip it away. Her car sliced through the night rain. In her heart, it pounded louder than the thunder. Linda burst through the hospital doors. Hair-soaked eyes, wild chest rising and falling like waves crashing on shore. Daniel Carter, she gasped to the front desk. I need to see him. The nurse looked up. Are you family? Linda hesitated. Family. That word had always felt like a wound, but tonight it felt like a vow. His wife, she said. The lie didn't tremble. It landed steady like truth. The nurse nodded. Room 3B, he's in critical care. Go. Linda moved through the hall like her legs didn't belong to her. Her hand brushed against the white walls as if trying to hold on to something, anything, before it all disappeared. She found him, hooked to machines, pale, still. But when she stepped inside, his eyes fluttered open. He saw her, and he smiled. That small, fragile smile broke her. She dropped to his side, took his hand and whispered, I'm here. Your wife is here. And in that moment, it didn't matter how they got there. Only that they weren't alone anymore. The machines beeped in rhythm. Linda sat beside him, fingers laced through his. She hadn't let go since the moment she walked in. I thought I lost you, she whispered. Daniel turned his head, weak but awake. You almost did. Then came the silence, the kind that asked permission to speak truth. Can I tell you something, Linda? His voice rasped like worn gravel. She nodded, and so he told her, not everything, but enough to make the walls feel like they were closing in. I used to run a company, Daniel began. Carter Steelworks. We built half the skyline in Philadelphia. Linda blinked. I had a wife, a beautiful house, lavish friends, power, respect. He paused, then let out a dry laugh. And then I lost it all in a single year. He didn't sugarcoat it. His business partner, his best friend, embezzled millions and framed Daniel for tax fraud. His wife, she knew, and signed the divorce papers faster than the ink could dry. In court, Daniel lost everything: his company, his name, his reputation. Worse, no one even asked if the story was true. One night I walked out of that courthouse and never went back. He looked at Linda. I didn't know who I was anymore. Her hand tightened around his. You're not alone anymore, she said. Daniel's eyes filled, not with tears, but with the first flicker of something else. Hope. He didn't need to say it. She didn't ask, but the moment Linda opened her arms, Daniel fell into them like he'd been falling his whole life. The hospital bed creaked softly. The IV line tugged against his skin. But none of it mattered. She held him, not tightly, just enough. Enough to tell him, you're safe now. He buried his face in her shoulder, and for the first time in years, Daniel let go of shame, of loss of the weight he carried like armor. Linda didn't say a word. Her eyes closed. She just breathed. And in that breath, a promise bloomed between them. Not spoken, not signed, but real. Two broken people choosing each other without grand declarations, without guarantees, without tomorrow. Just here, now, in this fragile, fleeting, beautiful moment. It started with a form, a simple government-issued form, name, date of birth, social security number, which he barely remembered. Linda sat beside him at the county office holding a pen. Daniel stared at the paper like it was a mirror, because for years he had no name, no proof he existed. Let's start with your name, she whispered. Daniel Carter, he said. His voice cracked. She smiled. Welcome back. From there, it was 1,000 steps. A photo ID that made him flinch. A rusum built from the ashes of a life he'd lost. Job applications were the question, what have you been doing the last 10 years, stabbed deeper than any wound? But Linda didn't let go. When he froze filling out the form, she held his hand. When he walked into interviews trembling like a ghost, she waited outside the door. Some days he wanted to quit, to vanish again. But each time he looked at her, he remembered he had a reason now. Not to impress, not to prove, but to live. One afternoon, he came home holding a brown envelope. She opened it. Inside his ID, his new job offer, his second chance. Daniel Carter was back. Not the tycoon, not the millionaire. Just a man rebuilding one document, one rejection, one small victory at a time, with love as his compass. The fire crackled. The stars above the cabin stretched endlessly, a silent witness to two lives reborn. Daniel sat on the old wooden steps. Linda leaned against his shoulder, a blanket wrapped around both of them. For a moment, there was only stillness. Then he spoke. "If I had to lose everything," he said slowly, "my home, my name, my pride." He paused. His voice trembled. But his eyes, they were steady. "Just to find you, Linda." He turned to look at her. "Then it was worth it. All of it." Linda didn't cry. She smiled. A small, knowing smile that said, "I feel it too." No grand music, no fireworks. Just a quiet truth between two hearts, that sometimes you have to lose the world to find your person. Linda wasn't alone anymore. The woman who once blew out birthday candles in silence now woke up to the smell of coffee, to laughter echoing in the kitchen, to someone waiting for her by the window, just because he missed her face. Daniel wasn't nameless anymore. The man who used to be invisible to the world now had a name on a mailbox, a name that someone whispered with love, a name that finally felt like his. They didn't have a mansion, they didn't have millions, but they had shared toothbrushes, socks in the laundry that didn't match, books stacked by the bed, and two chairs on the cabin porch that faced the stars. Linda had found more than a man. She had found home. Daniel had gained more than a second chance. He had found someone who saw him even when the world looked away. Together, they were not what the world expected, but they were what hearts needed. They looked up at the night sky, but it wasn't just stars they saw. They saw a future with no need for pretending. A life where broken hearts were still worthy of love. A world where you could begin again, not in spite of your scars, but because of them. The cabin behind them creaked softly. The wind carried the smell of pine and second chances. Daniel reached for Linda's hand, fingers interlocked like puzzle pieces finally finding their place. No promises, no grand plans. Just this, a silent vow under a sky full of stars. We are not lost anymore, and somehow that was enough. Not everyone who comes after is a replacement. Some people are not the next chapter, they're a brand new story. Daniel never tried to erase Linda's pain. He simply stayed, listened, showed up when no one else did. And Linda, she didn't ask Daniel to become her past. She gave him the space to be her future. What they built together wasn't perfect. It was quiet, real, earned. Because love after loss isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering without breaking. About beginning again without shame. About saying, "You don't have to heal me, just hold me while I do." That's not a replacement. That's a miracle. And sometimes miracles wear worn-out boots and knock on your life when you least expect them. Sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin at the very moment we think our story has ended. Linda's journey teaches us that healing doesn't always come from grand gestures or perfect people, but from simple, quiet presence, from being seen, from being believed in. So if you're feeling lost, broken, or forgotten, remember this: your story isn't over. Not yet. The right people don't rescue you. They walk beside you while you rescue yourself. And love, real love, waits patiently at the edge of the darkest forest, not to fix you, but to remind you, you were never too far gone to be found. If this story touched your heart, imagine what more we could share together. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and become part of a community where every story has a soul. At Through Her Eyes, we tell the stories that the world forgets, but your heart remembers. Don't miss the next chapter.